Okay, I want to talk about one of the most misunderstood things in political science today, because there's the saying, if you're not a liberal when you're young, then you have no heart, and a conservative when you're old, then you have no brain, right? So there's sort of this natural progression that we kind of assume that people will have in politics from the point of view of, yeah, the government can take care of everyone, to, as people get older, then believing that the government is not supposed to do very many things and can't really solve problems, and when it does, it's inefficient, and therefore you don't really want the government to do stuff. Then you become conservative. Then later, perhaps you become strict constitutionalist and really believe, okay, whatever they were thinking when that document was written, that's what we need to do, and this is how we need to have government. And then perhaps there's a further progression into libertarian, whatever that is. So now you're just sort of connected to liberty as a concept. And then you start looking at all the different ways that people can be free together, and everyone has their own ideas about that. And the funny thing, just as an aside, is you'll see that all the concepts from liberalism to democracy to communism, all of these isms basically had their foundation in the idea that everybody is equal and should have an equal voice in what happens, and we should all work together and care about each other. And as soon as these ideas were propounded, then they're taken and stolen and changed and become something else. And so liberalism becomes now something that's completely divorced from the original ideas of liberalism that were around 150 years ago. And communism has become complete power by the state. And democracy now means that, what is a democracy? We have a democracy. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't really mean anything. The same thing happened with anarchism. So my personal introduction to anarchism was I went to Occupy Wall Street. When I was at Occupy Wall Street, I went to one of the tables that was sitting there and met a couple of really cool people. And I said, well, what is it that you do? And they said, we're anarchists. I said, what do anarchists believe? And they said, we will not rule nor be ruled. And I thought, that's such a great attitude. I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. And I have no right to tell anyone else how to live their lives either. So I said, that sounds like me. And thus I decided I was anarchist. But the thing happened, and I've been studying why that was such a good idea and what that meant. And just like anarchism was the same idea as direct democracy, or the same idea as horizontalism or liberalism or communism, all of these ideas were the same thing, basically, that people up top shouldn't have power, the people at the bottom, before they were all shifted to mean whatever the hell it is they mean today. So once I discovered that there was such a thing as anarchy, and I started reading about it and studying it, I was looking at all the different flavors. There's communist anarchists, and there's bunches of different areas of different names and colors and things that anarchists use. But one that I wanted to talk about specifically, with all due respect to Stefan Molyneux and the Freedom Feens and Stone of Bad Quaker, all of these people, a lot of whom I really respect, and a lot of whom do great arguments about why we actually don't need a government at all, in terms of some giant authority that tells us what to do and how to live. But what they want is anarcho-capitalism, meaning somehow a system of anarchy that still has capitalism and makes money, and you can have profit and you can become really rich, etc. Well, I want to talk about the issues with that in a moment, but first I want to say that Murray Rothbard said that there could be no such thing, that he, as an anarcho-capitalist, was not an anarchist by the definition. The definition of an anarchist originally, we're getting rid of everything in society that creates inequality. That means religious and spiritual leadership that claims power over others. This means in family systems. This means government. And this means also any system of oppression that exists in society, like money. Some people work all the time because they don't own the means of production. We're back to Marx again. Some people live complete lives of leisure and have basically slaves through the capitalist system. So that was what anarchy originally wanted. Well, the anarcho-capitalists say, well, we can have anarchy and we just want to have capitalism as well. And so Stefan Molyneux always argues this. Anarcho-capitalist arguments on the idea of ownership. So what does that mean? That means that he says, well, you own your body, don't you? We can't argue with that. You own your body. And here is his first fallacy. This is where he goes astray, because you don't own your body. Ownership is a legal term and is a legal concept. As such, it's defined by an authoritarian system or authority or custom or something. It could be nothing owns anything in nature. Dolphins don't own anything. Bears don't own anything. They don't understand the concept. And they don't exercise ownership. They don't have police or military to enforce ownership. Ownership is a legal term, and you need an authority to decide who owns what. Possession exists. So do I possess this computer? Is it in my hands? Do I have it now? Yeah, then I possess it. It's in my possession, right? Which is why you get possession of narcotics. You go to jail, not ownership of narcotics, right? You can't own something that's illegal for you to own because the government decides what ownership is. So anyway, back to the topic. So he says, well, you own your body, therefore you own whatever work you do with your body. And of course, that continues on until you own a factory and you own this and you own that. And I just have to ask him, well, okay, so if two people say they own the same piece of land, who gets to decide who actually owns it? And always the answer is, and this goes back to how the state and government was created in the first place, always the answer is whoever has the bigger enforcement power over it. In other words, who has the police or the army to say that you own it. Well, guess what? As soon as you've got police and army saying that ownership is enforceable, what is that? That is government. That's what it is. And he says, well, we're going to have all these organizations, these these organizations that enforce contracts, and there'll be lots of them, and they'll have all sorts of competition, whatever. But these organizations are doing nothing more. If they're deciding who owns stuff, then they're doing nothing more than running the position of government, in which case you have the government that you wanted to get rid of in the first place. So you can't have ownership in an anarchist society, not purely. In fact, ownership is completely a fiction anyway. Who is to say who owns what? Who owns California? All the white people who killed all the native people who were there, that therefore they own it, so they can put an office down and say who owns it. You don't have any more right to say anybody owns land, and that's the big question, who owns the land. If you get rid of the government and put in a bunch of contract dispute resolution, I think they're called DROs, dispute resolution organizations, you don't have any more right to say who owns the land with a DRO than you do with the United States government. It's the same nonsense. Who sold you the land in the first place? Where did you get the right to say this land is yours? There is no fundamental right. It's an agreement. It's whether everyone else lets you do it. And that's how it actually works today. And that's how it would work if there were DROs. So, the anarcho-capitalists, you hear them talking, and what they want is no government, but they certainly don't want equality. They certainly don't want everybody having equal chance. In fact, you can hear some of them arguing for such great ideas as, well, it should be possible because you own your body to sell yourself into slavery to pay for, have a company pay for your college education and then sell like the first 10 years of your life as employment to them for, the investment for your education. I mean, they're arguing for indentured servitude, some of them. They're arguing for slavery, basically. They're into setting up DROs that serve as governments that will just have the people, whoever paid the DRO, which again is the guy with the most money and power, to say you own this particular piece of land, with the military and police power to enforce it. You've just reestablished everything that you thought you were getting rid of when you got rid of government. You cannot have ownership without force, without coercion. If you didn't, then anytime anyone decides, well, this belongs to me, then you would have to resolve it through peaceful negotiation, which if you have a DRO, you're not going to do. Well, they say, well, it'll be cheaper to solve it peacefully. Yeah, but the whole ability of the DRO to have a negotiation is to have the force behind it so that you have to agree more or less with what it says. If they have no force whatsoever, then there's simple mediators, and then again, we're back to a New Testament model. It's just, you just can't go, if you're going to go to true freedom, you can't go halfway with the concept of anarcho-capitalism and make some people rich and some people poor and some people have all the land and some people work for the people who have all the land. You haven't solved anything in that situation. You're going to have to go further. You're going to have to go to golden rule. You're going to have to go to mutual brotherhood, sisterhood, and love of all people. You're going to have to drop ideas about the work ethic and that people have to earn a living or earn their right to be on the planet. You're going to have to drop all of that, and you're going to have to drop the idea that you can own a massive amount of anything, whether it's oil in the earth or someone's time or their physical bodies or their effort. There's a wonderful site about this that's called abolishhumanrentals.com, which basically says, you know what, if I hire you as a hitman to go kill somebody, then you don't get out of the fact that you went and killed somebody because I paid you to do it. And yet, if you do something for a corporation, you build something, create something, then whatever you create or produce belongs to the corporation and not to you, which is just a piece of paper and a legal fiction anyway. If the anarcho-capitalists get their way and the state does not exist anymore, then they're going to have a lot bigger problems than to try and define ownership through DROs. They're going to have to figure out who owns everything that exists right now, and all corporations will have to be restructured. And how will we do it? Well, my favorite way to do this is the Mondragon cooperative model, where basically everybody who works there has rights to what happens. And there's other cooperatives and organizations that share things and don't really worry about whether you were the one who produced it or whether you were the one who created it or had the brilliant idea, but realize that we're all part of this tribe, this community, and a lot of us are producing at any given moment just because out of the joy of doing so, being creative, and a lot of us are in resting periods or ill or have lots of things going on, and it's not because we paid the insurance or we were smart enough to do the right investments that we deserve to keep living, but instead because we are loving, we care about each other, and because it just feels good to be happy and joyful and helpful to each other and resolve problems resolve disputes without resorting to violence or attacking each other. Anyway, this is my short presentation about why there is no such thing as anarcho-capitalism, why it can't exist, because the premise of ownership does not exist in nature. It's not fundamental. If you define it, you just created a government, because ownership is a legal term. And looking forward to hearing any comments anybody may have about that. I'm happy to debate this. I'm happy to learn at all times. This has been Ryan Orrock, and this is probably best connected to peaceful-living.org, which is my website that I talk about peaceful living and how we can live together in community and share and help each other meet our needs, which is one of my big goals. So I thank you for listening and look forward to hearing from you, or I will be doing more of these later.